Hello, everybody, and welcome to year 5 of the Trump presidency. Oh, wait, week 5. Week 5 of the Trump presidency. It just feels like 5 years. um, and there's barely United States left anymore. But I did want to talk about sort of the basic uh, things that Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing to radically change the U.S. from a quasi democracy into a complete dictatorship. And I wanted to focus on 5 main thrusts of their activities right now. Um, and for each of them, we'll talk about what it is they're doing, why I think they're doing it, and what the net effect of it is likely to be. I'm going to give you a hint in advance. Net effects tend to not be good for most of the things that they're doing. The why is more interesting, and we'll focus a bit on that. But let's talk about sort of 5 main areas that Trump and Musk have been hitting hard in the first month and a half of Trump's second presidency. These include the virtual shutting down of the southern border of the United States and the slowly ramping up of deportation of undocumented immigrants from the U.S. The use of tariffs and tariff threats to, I guess, in Trump's mind, generate more revenue for the government and maybe extract concessions from U.S. trading partners. The really massive shutting down of government agencies and government aid to states and universities and entities around the country that embrace what Trump calls DEI initiatives, and we'll talk about what that really means. Restricting access to various media outlets from the White House. And I think that's eventually going to lead to what it always leads to in dictatorships, which is the shutting down of independent media throughout the United States. Alienating our traditional foreign allies, except for Israel, and giving aid and comfort to our foreign adversaries. This one is interesting, and we'll spend some time on that. So again, for each of these, talk a little bit about what's been done, what's being done, why they're doing it, what the net effect is likely to be. Starting with immigration. So Trump has fulfilled already one of his campaign promises, which was to basically shut down the flow of illegal immigration through the United States' southern border with Mexico. And he's really done that. I mean, at the height of illegal immigration during the Biden administration, I think back in 2022, there were like 11,000 immigrants entering the country through the southern border per day. I think some crazy number like that. And now it's down to less than 200, so that flow has virtually stopped. Interestingly, a lot of the folks who were planning to try to get into the United States before this real crackdown at the southern border occurred have turned around. Some of them gone back to their home countries, but others are actually trying to immigrate into other countries, some South American countries, which are now getting a bit overburdened with immigrants. So there's been kind of a reverse migration going on. The way that Trump has really been able to shut down the southern border, and he did promise to do this in his campaign, is he's brought the military down there. So it's not just border patrol now, it's also military personnel. Trump was able to do this by declaring an emergency at the southern border. So he could use active duty U.S. military troops and transports to go down there and help with border enforcement and help with deportation activities, flying people back to their countries, etc. So Trump is also trying to ramp up uh, the deportation of undocumented immigrants that are already in the U.S. That's going more slowly. He is, I think, deporting more on a daily basis now than Biden did on average, but uh, it's going slowly. I mean, he promised to just deport people who were here committing crimes. So initially, that would mean that you'd have to do sort of criminal investigations, find out, you know, who is undocumented, who's actually committed, say, felonies in the United States, where they might be, try to track them down. Uh, so if you do that in a targeted way, it takes a lot of personnel, it takes a lot of hours of investigation, uh, and we don't have the police and investigation units to do that on a sort of a mass scale on a daily basis. So that's ramping up more slowly. Of course, in some of these raids that they've done to try to, find folks that they're looking for, they've also swept up some illegal immigrants who have not been committing crimes. And they've been put on planes for deportation too, since they happen to be maybe in the proximity of people who ICE was really looking for. But in any case, it's had a pretty chilling effect on the undocumented worker population in the U.S. I think a lot of them feel now that they really need to go underground. And that has some knock-on effects, including, for example, withdrawing kids from school because they might be worried that, at school their kids could be rounded up. But the shutdown at the southern border has worked, bringing the military down there, and also, of course, just the word of mouth that's happening that Trump's basically no longer giving asylum to anybody, and he's changed rules to make it much easier to deport people without hearings. For example, if somebody's been in the country less than 2 years now under an executive order, they can be deported without a hearing. So this has been effective. Flow of illegal immigrants into the U.S. through the southern borders really slowed down to virtually nothing compared to what it was. So, Trump fulfilled that campaign promise as far as going after the immigrants who are already here. He's starting to fill that campaign promise. We don't really know how far he's going to take it, how long he's going to try to keep it restricted to, folks who've committed crimes in the United States. Why is he doing this? Well, because he promised to. And not only in his second term, but his first term too. And he's basically fulfilling that promise. The deportation of existing illegal immigrants is going to go a lot slower, especially if he tries to maintain his promise to just target people who've committed crimes. Okay, so the net effect of this dramatically slowed immigration through the southern border. A very nervous illegal immigrant population within the United States who are worried about being caught up in these ICE raids and rounded up and deported. And so that drives people who are, doing regular work for us underground. They may end up taking their kids out of school if they feel their kids are going to be targeted there. So there's some knock-on effects we're seeing already. Is this making us safer? Trump wanted ostensibly to shut down the southern border to make us safer. So is this making us safer? Well, according to FBI statistics, a smaller percentage of illegal immigrants commit crimes in the U.S. than native-born people. So you had a higher percentage of native-born people committing crimes here than illegal immigrants. So blocking illegal immigration isn't uh, really a crime reduction action. Now, as far as the deportations go, if you do selectively target people who've already committed crimes here for deportation, then that could increase public safety if the people you're actually deporting are primarily people who are criminals. Um, Now, there's no guarantee that Trump's going to keep to that group. My suspicion is he won't really. It's going to become a wider and wider net. And once you start depopulating uh, undocumented immigrants who are here and not committing crimes, they're just doing regular jobs, then you run into very negative net effects for the economy. Something I talked about in another podcast. For example, if you start depopulating the industries of workers where illegal immigrants tend to work, like agriculture, like meat packing, like construction, you start depopulating those worker groups, those worker pools, and suddenly it becomes way harder and more expensive to get your homes built or rebuilt. It becomes more expensive to get and buy produce and meat. So food products are more expensive. Housing is more expensive. Net effect of that is inflationary for the average U.S. consumer. So that's not a particularly good thing. I don't think that's what most people want here. But if you really do significantly depopulate the immigrant population in the U.S., that's what's going to happen. They make up a large percentage of workers in a lot of key vital U.S. industries. And the truth is, we need the workers, right? The U.S., if you take out immigrants from the U.S. population, the native-born U.S. population the birth rate for them is flat to declining. That means that basically those folks who are here natively, who were born here, are not producing enough children to replace themselves and replace the people who are dying in the United States. And historically, throughout history, no nation or empire has ever survived for long with a declining birth rate and declining population. And there's really sound, basic demographic and economic reasons for that. Well, main one being that if you have a declining birth rate and an aging population, you have fewer and fewer young people to support more and more old people. And old people are just less productive than young people. So you have more and more less productive people being supported by fewer and fewer more productive people. And economically, that's just not sustainable. That's a economically declining society. So for the U.S. population, U.S. society to remain healthy economically, we have to have a lot of immigrants. Now, could we have just a more robust legal immigration program? Sure, we could. And we've tried to do that, but it's been shot down in Congress several times. Path to citizenship rules and various other rules that could really dramatically expand legal immigration, like guest worker programs, etc. All of this, that problem is solvable. That declining population with an influx of legal immigration. But Trump doesn't seem interested in increasing legal immigration significantly, other than his $5 million buy yourself a U.S. visa for a lot of money. But don't think there's enough people in the world that have $5 million to spare to buy themselves a gold visa to replace, all the workers that we need. So the net effect of this crackdown on illegal immigration is probably not going to be a significant increase in U.S. safety, likely to be a significant increase in U.S. inflation. Um, and overall, a decline in economic output from the U.S. just because we don't have enough workers, young workers, to support an older population. I get tired of hearing that, illegal immigrants are only a drain on our society economically. There may be certain ways that they do drain the society economically, and you could certainly argue it. But one way they tend to actually support us economically, and particularly older folks, is a lot of illegal immigrants that want to work here at legitimate jobs. What they do is they illegally sort of use deceased people's social security numbers in order to give themselves some, paper legitimacy on paper so they can do these jobs. And then once they get hired by these jobs, like in agriculture, for example, or in construction, if they get paid a salary or they get paid above board, then because they have a social security number, they actually pay social security taxes, they pay Medicare taxes, but because they're not actually citizens, they never get to receive those benefits. So they're paying into a benefit system for older folks that they never get to pull money out of. So in that way, they're actually a net positive economically for society. So anyway, I think the net effect of the immigration stuff over the long run, if it's sustained for a long period of time and it expands, will probably be negative economically. Inflationary, and will also hurt growth in GDP. Next thing that Trump is pursuing is tariffs and tariff threats. He really seems to misunderstand the concept of tariffs. The tariffs that he's imposing, and tonight he's supposed to impose 25% tariffs on our biggest trading partners, which are Mexico and Canada, our neighbors, and another 10% on China. These are all our major trading partners. Tariffs, of course, are inflationary because these are import tariffs he's talking about. Import tariffs are not paid by the country that sends us stuff. They're paid by the companies in the United States that import the stuff. That's why they call it an import tariff. So, for example, if we put a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, Canada doesn't pay that tariff. The companies in the United States that import Canadian products pay that money to the government. It's essentially a tax on U.S. companies that import materials from Canada. So, for example, if a U.S. company has to import Canadian lumber, which is going to get 25% more expensive now, then it's the U.S. company that's importing the Canadian lumber that has to remit that 25% increased cost to the government. It's a tax on our companies, U.S. companies. And of course, when U.S. companies get taxed more, they tend to pass on that, that hurts their profits, right? Now they're paying more for goods, so they tend to pass on that cost to consumers, and if they sell into the United States, which they do because they're U.S. companies, then they're going to pass on at least some of that increased cost to U.S. consumers, and that's inflationary. So Trump sees tariffs as a way of increasing federal revenue because the government gets more money, right? It's collecting money, but it's collecting it from U.S. businesses, which then, to maintain profit margins, would have to pass on that cost to U.S. consumers. So the net effect is just an increase in inflation. And inflation is already significant. So, why Trump thinks this is the magical solution to the federal budget deficit, I don't know. Maybe because, in the short run, more money is coming into the government, but it's coming out of the hides of U.S. consumers and U.S. businesses. So, robbing one group to pay another, essentially robbing consumers and businesses to put more money in the government. Now, why Trump hates the government? Why does he want more money in the government? Well, because he wants to do a huge tax break for his rich friends. big tax break for big companies and very rich people. And the more money he can stick in the government coffers, the bigger the tax break he can do. So, okay. But again, this is just shifting the money from smaller companies and consumers to bigger companies and richer people. Don't see how that's a net positive for the economy. It's likely, very likely to be net negative. Plus, it really alienates our trading partners, which are mostly our neighbors. These were, people we had a good relationship with, like Canada, and now we're not going to have. Now we don't have such a good relationship with them anymore. And hard to see how that is helping us in the long run. I'll tell you though, one thing I would have supported Trump in doing, and it seemed like he might be doing this at the beginning, is instead of actually imposing tariffs on folks, using the threat of tariffs, saying, I'm going to impose unless you do something for us. And he wanted to, for example, use the threat of tariffs against Mexico to get Mexico to do more to restrict the flow of illegal drugs and immigrants into the United States. And that's not something I'm completely against. For example, the president of Mexico, under threat of tariff, she decided to hand over a whole bunch of cartel leaders to the U.S. justice system. And I think in the long run, what Trump would be angling for is to use the tariff threats to get her to allow the U.S. military to go down and actually do battle with the cartels directly in Mexico. So have U.S. troops in Mexico. And to be honest with you, I'm not against that. And I'm not against that use of tariffs. But that use of tariffs is actually not a real use of tariffs, it's use of the threat of tariffs. Okay, you say, if you don't let us do this, then we'll do that. But presumably they'll let us do this, and so we won't have to do that. We won't have to do the tariffs. Because once you actually do the tariffs, then the economic pain ensues almost immediately. And it redounds to us. It's our economic pain. So, and even worse if they do retaliatory tariffs back at us, which Canada has already threatened to do. So, I wasn't really against Trump's idea of using the threat of tariffs to extract some concessions and maybe a little extortion on our neighbors to get some things that we really need, like a slower flow of drugs across our borders. But to use actual tariffs just as like economic punishment, that's just really punishing ourselves. And it's not actually increasing federal revenue the way that Trump thinks in any kind of productive way that's going to help the U.S. economy, other than maybe by giving Trump cover that he needs to give his rich friends a tax break, which doesn't help the general economy. Rich people don't spend most of their money, they invest most of their money or save it. And so rich people are just not as economically productive as middle class and poorer folks who tend to spend almost every dime they get. So anyway, this is, when you shift money from middle class folks and poorer folks to richer folks, that was the old trickle-down economics idea from the Reagan era, and it never worked. It's not economically productive. In fact, it's economically counterproductive. So that's not going to be a good thing. This one I really dislike and almost seems bizarre and puzzling. And but Trump and Musk, he's using Musk as his point man now to go through government agencies and basically cut all their funding. And he's not being very discriminatory about it. In fact, not at all. Just cutting everybody they can cut, cutting every agency they can cut. And at the same time, threatening and cutting government aid to non-governmental agencies like states and universities and business entities that they say embrace DEI initiatives. All right, so first let's talk about the shutting down of government agencies and then the DEI initiatives, because DEI here is a code word. But the shutting down of government agencies, the first agency they went after was USAID, which does a lot of foreign aid, gives a lot of aid to foreign countries, and mostly does things like feed people who are hungry in other countries, keep medical clinics open, provide medical care to people who are sick in other countries. So feeding the hungry, ministering to the ill, and clothing, providing clothing and basic necessities to people. Now, of course, there are some other things that are done by USAID, but some cultural things, for example, which they make a big deal about. But basically, most of the functions of USAID have to do with providing people food, medicine, protection, clothing, housing, just basic humanitarian stuff. And it's a very small percentage of the budget. USAID, I think, is less than 1% of the US expenditures every year. So why do they want to shut down these agencies? Well, Trump's thing is he wants to make government smaller and more efficient so they can free up, again, this is more about freeing up money for tax breaks for the rich. The less you spend on government workers and government agencies, the more you can spend on, tax breaks. But a lot of these agencies really, in fact, even all of them together, pretty small percentage of the U.S. budget. So, there's got to be something more to it than that. Also, a lot of these agencies have people that provide necessary services to the U.S. I mean, not only are we cutting off things like, humanitarian foreign aid through USAID, but, he's reducing staff at FAA. So that's fewer people keeping our skies safe and keeping us safe when we're in airplanes. Why would you even want to do that? What's the point of that? And the one to me that really blows my mind is he's basically shut down the NIH and the NSF, which are the major scientific research funding agencies of the federal government. You got to understand, for those of you who don't know science, most science research, particularly most biomedical research in the United States, is actually funded by the government. Most university research in biomedicine is funded by NIH, National Institute of Health. And a lot of, engineering and other basic science research funded by NSF. And basically, these organizations have been shut down. Their staffs cut, their grants frozen. It's gotten so bad that universities are, having to shut down research programs. They're having to stop taking on new graduate students to do research work at the university. I mean, that's crazy. The United States is like a world leader in scientific research primarily because of funding for these agencies. So shutting down the funding is nuts. And particularly badly timed because we're on the verge right now, biomedically, of some major discoveries. I mean, right on the verge of, coming up with really effective treatments for cancer, for Alzheimer's. And I mean, when I say right on the verge, I mean right on the verge. I mean, we're literally months or maybe a few years away to have some major breakthroughs in treatments for these horrific diseases. So this shutdown comes at a really bad time for us because now, new treatments that are effective that we were going to be able to bring to the U.S. population probably within months or a few years are going to be delayed, maybe by a long time. There's no sense of when this funding might be restored. And I can't imagine why anyone who cares about the U.S. at all would want to do that, would want to shut down U.S. research science. This is what keeps us, at the forefront of treatments and uh, discovery and engineering. And I mean, the U.S. is still considered a world leader in all of these things. Why would you want to threaten our position there? And basically by default allow other nations to take our place as world leaders in science, to take our discoveries, and leave our population sicker while theirs gets well. It doesn't make any sense socially, it doesn't make any sense economically, because it doesn't even make any sense from the private sector side, because university research, which is publicly funded, comes up with discoveries that then the private sector uses to develop new treatments. And then the private sector profits from those new treatments. So, it's crazy to do this. It hurts the public health. It hurts the private sector profits. There's no winner in this. No winner at all for the U.S. except for one, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But a lot of the shutdowns that they're doing are, they're not thought out at all. They're not a net cost savings. Like, they're firing a bunch of people at the IRS. Well, folks at the IRS who do auditing, who are getting canned by the thousands now, they actually generate more revenue for the government than they cost. In other words, the money that they find in their audits and that they force people to pay to the government is more than the money that they're paid in salary. So this is actually a net economic loss to the government, firing these people. Now, I understand why Trump wants to do it, because he doesn't like to be audited. And his rich friends don't either, and the rich companies that he supports don't either. So, he may see this as taking out enemies, but from an economic standpoint, it's terrible. And also the firing of all these employees. The federal government employs 3 million people, and that's not including military personnel. So you fire a significant percentage of that group, and you raise the U.S. unemployment rate, and then you get economic slowdowns and disruptions, and GDP goes down, and it's bad. Economically, it's bad. Plus, if you combine the inflationary effects of immigration enforcement and tariffs with the unemployment effects of shutting down government agencies, which, by the way, doesn't just throw people out of work in the government, because these government agencies contract with U.S. companies for a lot of their products and services. So you shut down the agencies, and private companies get hurt too, and then they have to lay off people. So you get increased unemployment from this, you get increasing inflation from these, and that gives you the worst of all economic worlds, which is stagflation, where you have an economy with high unemployment and high inflation. So just bad economic news all around. This is disastrous for us. Plus, we lose vital government services. Government does some important stuff, like keeps us safe when we're in airplanes and funds medical research. This is important stuff. Even the USAID funding of treatment for diseases overseas helps prevent pandemics or epidemics that are overseas from spreading back to our shores and making our people sick. The less we control epidemics overseas, the more chance that they'll spread to the United States and make U.S. people sick. So this is so wrong on so many levels. Not just morally and ethically wrong, but just economically and wrong from a public health standpoint. You're not making America greater here. You're making America sicker and poorer. The shutting off of government aid to states and universities and entities that embrace DEI initiatives, it's really a way of punishing liberals and Democrats, who tend to be the ones embracing these things. But you got to understand, when Trump and Musk, those kind of folks, use DEI. DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Basically, these are programs designed to give people who've been historically disadvantaged in the United States, which is mostly, depending on the industry, women or non-white folks or gay folks or transgender folks, or even veterans. And veteran support groups are actually under DEI. Also, people with disabilities. So people who've had disadvantages, structural disadvantages in our society. DEI initiatives were designed to help them, help them succeed better in our society, and to address some barriers to their success. Now, you can argue about whether DEI went too far in some cases, and I'm sure it did. In fact, I know that in some cases, they went too far with it. But still, when Trump uses DEI, when he talks about that, his real bug, I think, about DEI is, aside from the fact that it's something Democrats and liberals embrace and they don't support him, is he sees DEI as anti-white male. So when he hears DEI, he's like, everything that makes things that make life harder for white males, because in his view, he's got a very zero-sum game view of the universe. And so in his view, when you give some help or advantage to one group, like women or people of color, then you have to then disadvantage another group like white men. And Trump and Musk believe that white men are the naturally superior group. They should not be disadvantaged to advantage some other group that's inferior. And so DEI is just code for them for anything that they believe could disadvantage white men and keep them from succeeding and ruling as they should. This is very white supremacist philosophy. So that's the DEI is really a code for white supremacy. But in any case, it also has the advantage that it lets Trump directly financially punish states and entities that he considers unsupportive of him. But the net effect of all this, and particularly the shutting down of the government agencies, very bad economic effect. Net effects: increase in unemployment, increasing poverty, increasing strain on government social resources like unemployment insurance and Medicaid, and basically slow down in economic activity and GDP. So bad economic effects. Okay, moving on to the media restrictions. So far, Trump is just getting really started with this. He has restricted press access to the White House, to just friendly groups. He's convinced his new buddy, Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, that Bezos has promised not to publish anything negative, essentially, about the Trump regime in his paper. This is going to get more and more onerous because this is standard dictator playbook stuff. You shut down the independent media and the critical media so that people stop hearing that voice. And the hope is that the population will then essentially start embracing more and more the ideas of the administration, because they're going to hear less and less opposing voices. So we're shutting down the fourth estate here. I think eventually, and maybe in the not too distant future, given how fast things are moving, Trump will try to shut down like independent outlets that rely heavily on public monies, like PBS. For example, um, he will probably go after more liberal media, MSNBC, CNN, whatever, and through lawsuits against them, either force them to really dramatically reduce their critical coverage of him or get them out of business, bankrupt them. And eventually he may go after smaller, folks like, podcasters on YouTube and that kind of thing that are liberal podcasters that are critical of him. Since Zuckerberg is also his new best buddy, and Zuckerberg, I think, controls YouTube now, he could just ask him to delete these podcasts, and Zuck would probably do it. So, yeah, that's coming down the line. It's, again, just getting started, but it's going to accelerate, and we know where it goes because we've seen it go to that same place again and again with every dictatorship there's ever been. Finally, and this is probably the strangest and most confusing one, but there are ways we can make sense of it. Trump is determined now, he's completely 180'd our foreign policy. I mean, and I don't mean 180'd from like the Biden administration, although he's done that, but I mean 180'd from the last 85 years of U.S. history. Our traditional allies have been democratic nations, and that includes the nations of Europe, which are in the EU, European Union, and our NATO alliance with the European Union, and our mutual alliances with other democratic countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea. So we have alliances all over the world with countries that have more or less embraced a democratic ethos, and Trump is rupturing them all. He's basically withdrawn us from NATO. In the Ukraine, in the one major European war, Ukraine-Russia, we sided with Ukraine from the very beginning as they were a democratic nation, holding democratic elections, fighting against our traditional adversary, Russia, which invaded them, and they were trying to maintain their independence from Russia, whereas Russia was trying to turn them into just a Russian state. And so we've been siding with Ukraine, we've been arming Ukraine, we've been helping them fight this war, which has gone on for 3 years now. And all of a sudden Trump comes in and it's like, nope, we're not on Ukraine's side anymore. He stopped aid to Ukraine today. He yelled at the Ukrainian president the other day in the Oval Office, stopped aid to Ukraine today, and we've now sided with Russia. So talk about whiplash. Instead of siding with NATO and Ukraine, NATO's been supporting Ukraine as a democratic nation. We've now switched to siding with the dictatorship in Russia, siding with Putin against Ukraine and against NATO. And we've essentially withdrawn from NATO. Nobody in NATO believes now that we're going to support them in case of a Russian invasion, because clearly we're now on Russia's side. And that's the whole basis of the NATO treaty, is the U.S. promises to give military aid to any European country invaded by Russia. But it's clear we're not going to do that. That's Article 5 of the NATO treaty. We're clearly not going to do that anymore, so NATO is not NATO. They're on their own. Europeans are on their own now. They don't get our help. We've turned Canada into an enemy, slapping heavy tariffs on them, bad-mouthing their country, saying that Trump says he's going to make it the 51st state. He's threatened Greenland, which is controlled by Denmark. Denmark's a NATO country, so technically if we were still in NATO and we attacked Greenland and took Greenland from Denmark, we'd have to then attack ourselves because we were pledged to defend Greenland, to defend Denmark against foreign invasion, foreign invaders in that case would be us if we attack Greenland. So it's craziness. I mean, this 180 in the space of just a few weeks. You got to understand these treaties have held for 50, 60, 70, 80 years. This is the way it's been. And within a few weeks, Trump has reversed it all. I mean, completely reversed it all. So now we are the friend of the dictator. We are Putin's friend. We're probably Xi's friend too, the head of China now, although Trump hasn't talked as much about Xi, but he doesn't seem to be interested in engaging in any conflict with Xi and the Chinese sphere of influence in Asia. So what's the deal? The only traditional ally that we've kept through Trump's first 6 weeks is Israel. Israel has been a traditional ally of the U.S., and we've doubled down on our support for them, basically telling Netanyahu he can do anything he wants. And the only adversary that it seems like who's still a real adversary of ours, maybe Iran, because they threaten Israel, and we're still supporting Israel. So, but aside from those Middle Eastern exceptions, Trump has absolutely reversed 80 years of U.S. 85 years of U.S. foreign policy, 80 years of U.S. foreign policy. And he's done it in a few weeks. And we've switched sides. We're no longer on the side of democracies anymore around the world. We're on the side of dictatorships. Okay, now here's the puzzler. And I've seen so many podcasts where people are speculating about the answer to this question. Why would Trump want to do this? There is no obvious economic benefit to dropping our support of democracies and embracing dictatorships. There's no obvious benefit to us. There's an obvious benefit to the dictatorships. A great benefit to Russia. We've done Russia the biggest favor anybody's ever done Russia in the history of Russia. And if we take the same stance toward Xi and China, we'll be doing them a tremendous favor too. So why? Why rupture all of your friendly nation relationships to embrace a dictator that leads a country that's been historically hostile to your interests? That's actually, Putin has speculated openly about wanting America to fail. So why would Trump do this? Well, one possible reason is Trump is a Russian asset. To be honest, it's one of the few reasons that makes any sense. Some people have said he's a Russian agent. Maybe he's not an agent, maybe he's just an asset. A friendly pawn. That would be crazy if Russia managed to get an asset or an agent elected president of the United States. If that's the case, they've won the war with the U.S. or won the Cold War without firing a shot. Pretty impressive, especially given that their military couldn't hold a candle to ours and couldn't beat ours at any juncture. But it's hard to see what's in this for us, unless Trump really is a Russian asset. Even if he's not, and I admit that that's a real conspiracy theory that I'm promoting here, that Trump is a Russian agent or a Russian asset. But even if he isn't, he's behaving exactly like one. He's doing the same thing that a true Russian agent would do if they were in his position. And so the net effect is the same. It doesn't matter whether he's a Russian agent or not. He's acting like a Russian agent, so he's basically handing the Cold War to Putin, giving Putin everything he wants, bailing out Russia from their disastrous war with Ukraine, um, and essentially giving them green light to maybe go in and try invading some other European countries once they finish with Ukraine. Strengthening Putin's position in Russia, which was starting to become a little bit shaky. You know, why do that? And in all ways, weakening the U.S. None of this strengthens us. This does not strengthen us. You know, the only thing that it does, and here I'm going to speculate about another possible motive that Trump has for this. I think, and I'll talk more about this in the next video, but I think Trump is actually truly worried about, he did grow up in an era where I grew up in post-World War II, where Russia was a real nuclear threat to the United States. And I think that one of the few things that Trump really has to fear now that he's president again is a global war, a war with a nuclear armed power, where not only our country, but his life could be threatened in such a war. His existence threatened. His legacy threatened. And so one advantage, I suppose, with making friends with China and Russia would be to neutralize that threat. You wouldn't have to worry about China attacking us or Russia attacking us if we're now their best buddies. So maybe psychologically there's something to that. Maybe the reason he's behaving as a Russian asset is not that he's a Russian asset, but that he's actually afraid of what Putin and Russia can do to him personally. Killing him, for example, in a war or through assassination. And those are really the only powers he's afraid of in the world. And so by making friends with them, he doesn't have to be afraid of them, because no way they're going to do anything bad to him if he's on their side. You know, Trump is kind of life's, ultimate winner here, and I'll again go more in this in the next video, but when you're the ultimate winner, the one thing you're really afraid of is losing your life, because if you're life's winner, you don't want to die. Life is too good to you. So if he's afraid that these folks could kill him, either in a war or in a more personal way through assassination, or undermine him economically or his administration, then I suppose that there's some logic to becoming their friend so that that threat goes away. Of course, that threat presupposes that we were in a really vulnerable position to these countries, but the truth is we're not. Our economy right now, well, at least before Trump started messing with everything, our economy was much stronger than China's is now. China's economy is a bit of a mess. And our military is way stronger than Russia's, particularly after Russia's military has now been horribly degraded through 3 years of war with Ukraine. So we really have nothing to fear militarily or economically from Russia or China right now. So all this stuff that Trump is doing is degrading our ability, our superior abilities. He's degrading our superior military through his government shutdowns, and this is now going after the military. His and replacement of competent people with incompetent people in various government, military, and police organizations. And the economic woes that are going to ensue from the immigration policies, the tariff policies, the shutting down of government agencies. It's all going to make us weaker, economically weaker, militarily weaker. And we were already in superior position to everybody. to every other nation, including China and Russia. So, if Trump is doing this, he's either doing this because he's really worried about these nations and, wants to make friends so they don't hurt him, or he's doing it because he's actually a Russian agent or asset, or he's doing it because he just wants to be a dictator, and so he admires other dictators, wants to emulate them, and so wants to be their buddy. Maybe so you can get dictatorship pointers from them. Who knows? Any of these reasons are nuts or traitorous, and all of them, for whatever the reason happens to be, are going to end up dramatically weakening the military and economic position of the United States. So we're a mess. We're a mess. And civil unrest here in the U.S. is starting to brew. Eventually, we could be staring down the barrel of some real serious civil conflict here in the U.S. too, which would just further weaken and degrade the country. So I have to say, if Trump is a Russian asset, congratulations. You've done your master's bidding. You're wrecking the U.S. just like they want you to. Good job. And if it's for other reasons, you're just not seeing things clearly, and you're wrecking the U.S. anyway. So Trump ain't making America great again. Trump is just wrecking America. For all these reasons, he should be impeached. Obviously, the Congress is in his pocket, so that's not going to happen, at least not anytime soon. But we'll talk in the next video about how to fight back against this, because some of us do not want to see our country go down the tubes this way. Okay, so I'll see you in the next pod.